The morning light filtered through the heavy curtains of the Victorian home that had been Elizabeth Wilson's sanctuary for over 30 years. The pale November sun cast long shadows across the antique furniture they had collected together. The mahogany dresser from that little shop in Bath, the ornate mirror Thomas had surprised her with on their 20th anniversary, the bedside tables that had held their matching reading lamps, and the countless books they had discussed over morning tea. 3 months had passed since Thomas's funeral, yet the house still echoed with his absence. Every creak of the floorboards, every tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, seemed to whisper his name. The silence was the worst part. After 34 years of marriage, Beth had grown accustomed to the subtle soundtrack of their shared life. Thomas humming tunelessly while shaving in the bathroom, the rustle of his newspaper at breakfast, the gentle snoring that had once irritated her, but now she would give anything to hear again. The absence of those sounds created a vacuum that threatened to swallow her whole. Beth, as everyone called her, sat motionless at the edge of their bed. No, her bed now, staring at the wardrobe she had been avoiding since the day they lowered her husband into the cold ground. The polished oak doors gleamed in the sunlight, hiding the contents she had not been able to face. The cancer had taken Thomas quickly, leaving no time for the practical matters of grief. The doctors had given him 6 months. He had lasted barely 5, slipping away on a rainy Tuesday morning while Beth had stepped out to make tea. She had returned to find him gone, his hand still warm but his eyes vacant, robbing her of even the opportunity for final words. Today was the day. She had promised Emma that she would finally begin sorting through Thomas's belongings. "It's time, Mum," her daughter had said gently over their weekly Sunday tea, her eyes, so like Thomas's, full of concern. "Dad wouldn't want you living in a shrine." Emma always had been the practical one, so like Beth herself in temperament. James, their son, took after Thomas, more emotional, more impulsive, still unable to speak about his father without his voice breaking. Beth knew Emma was right, but that didn't make the task any less excruciating. With trembling fingers, Beth pulled open the heavy wooden doors of the wardrobe. Thomas's scent, a mixture of sandalwood, aftershave, and mint, wafted out, an invisible ghost that wrapped around her like an embrace. The physical jolt of it made her gasp, and for a moment she was transported back to their last real embrace, before the hospital beds and the morphine drip and the sickly smell of disinfectant had replaced his familiar scent. His suits hung in perfect order, organized by color as they had been throughout their 34 years of marriage. Navy blues giving way to charcoals, giving way to blacks, an aesthetic he had maintained from his first junior position at Barclays to his final days as regional director. The sight of them, so proper, so Thomas, made her throat tighten. "One item at a time," Beth whispered to herself, the mantra her grief counselor had suggested. Dr. Harrison had warned her about the emotional landmines hidden in the most mundane objects: a sock, a cufflink, a half-used bottle of cologne. "Don't rush," she had advised. "Grief isn't linear, and sorting through possessions can trigger unexpected reactions." She reached for a navy blazer, the one Thomas had worn to Emma's university graduation. She remembered the day vividly, the pride in his eyes as Emma had crossed the stage at Cambridge, the same university where Beth and Thomas had met 35 years earlier. He had looked so handsome that day, his silver hair catching the light, his posture still straight and proud. They had celebrated afterward at Emma's favorite restaurant, Thomas insisting on ordering champagne despite the exorbitant price, telling everyone within earshot that his daughter had followed in her brilliant mother's footsteps. As she lifted the blazer from the hanger, something fell from the pocket and clattered to the hardwood floor. Bending down, Beth discovered a small brass key, tarnished with age and unfamiliar in design. It was ornate, almost antique-looking, with an intricate pattern on its bow and a long, slender shaft. Beth frowned, trying to place it. It wasn't for any door in the house. Of that she was certain. Nor did it match the safe deposit box at the bank where they kept their important documents. This key was older, more ornate, almost Victorian, like the house itself. The mystery of it momentarily distracted Beth from her grief, her historian's mind automatically cataloging its features, trying to place it in time and function. Thomas had never been one for mysteries or secrets. He had been the most straightforward man she'd ever known, often to the point of bluntness. His world was one of ledgers and balance sheets, of debits and credits that always tallied at the end of the day. A mysterious key seemed out of character, like finding poetry among his financial reports. Beth pocketed the key and continued her task, methodically emptying Thomas's wardrobe. Each item carried a memory: the cashmere sweater she'd given him for their 25th anniversary, chosen with such care from that little shop in the Burlington Arcade; the ridiculous Christmas jumper with the light-up reindeer nose that he wore only to please the grandchildren, though he complained bitterly about it being undignified; the threadbare Cambridge University sweatshirt he refused to discard despite Beth's numerous attempts to replace it, insisting it brought him luck during important business presentations. Memories ambushed her with each garment: their first holiday in France, the garden party where he'd received his company's Lifetime Achievement Award, the Saturday walks along the coast where they dreamed about their retirement. They had planned to travel, to visit all the historical sites Beth had studied but never seen. Thomas had promised her Rome, Athens, Istanbul, cities laden with the history she had sacrificed to raise their family. Now those promises lay as empty as the hangers she was accumulating. By midday, she had filled 3 boxes labeled charity, though the process had been punctuated by moments when she found herself clutching his clothes to her chest, inhaling deeply as if she could somehow capture the essence of him before it faded forever. Her practical side knew this behavior bordered on the macabre, but her heart couldn't bear to part with these tangible connections to him quite yet. The suits were the hardest. Thomas had worn a suit every workday of his adult life, only switching to casual clothes on weekends and holidays. "A banker should look like a banker," he always said. "People are entrusting us with their financial futures. The least we can do is dress the part." The Thomas of her memories was permanently clad in fine wool and crisp cotton, his silk ties always perfectly knotted. Later that afternoon, Beth steeled herself to enter Thomas's study. This room had been exclusively his domain, a gentleman's retreat with leather-bound books, the antique desk that had belonged to his father, and the comfortable armchair where he would read the Financial Times every evening after dinner. For 34 years, this had been the one space in their home where she had always knocked before entering, respecting his need for a private sanctuary amid their shared life. The study represented Thomas in a way the rest of their shared spaces did not. It was purely him, untouched by her feminine influence. The room was exactly as he had left it the day he had been admitted to hospital for the final time. The leather blotter on the desk still held the indentations from his last written notes. His reading glasses sat folded beside the leather chair, a bookmark protruding from the biography he would never finish. The small drinks trolley in the corner held his favorite single malt, the level in the bottle unchanged since his last evening nightcap. It was as if the room itself were holding its breath, waiting for a master who would never return. Beth stood in the doorway, feeling like an intruder. The brass key weighed heavily in her cardigan pocket. Something about this room and that key seemed connected, though she couldn't articulate why. She moved cautiously to the desk, running her fingertips along its polished surface. Thomas had been meticulous about his workspace. Nothing out of place, every pen aligned, papers filed away. In death, as in life, he left everything in perfect order, or so she thought. Beth began examining the desk drawers systematically. The top right contained stamps, paper clips, and other mundane office supplies, all stored in a drawer organizer that kept each item in its proper place. She smiled faintly, remembering how Thomas would grumble when the children had borrowed a pen and returned it to the wrong compartment. "A place for everything, and everything in its place," he would say, a mantra that had extended to all aspects of his life. The left drawer held file folders with household accounts, electricity, water, council tax, all meticulously organized by type and date. Thomas had handled all their finances throughout their marriage. "It's what I do all day, darling," he had insisted whenever Beth had offered to take over the household bookkeeping. "Besides, you're rubbish with numbers." It was true. Her academic mind, more suited to historical narratives than spreadsheets, often struggled with the practical mathematics of daily life. The larger bottom drawers contained hanging files with tax returns, insurance policies, and other financial documents, all exactly where they should be, all precisely labeled in Thomas's elegant handwriting. Each file was a testament to his methodical nature, each labeled tab a demonstration of his attention to detail. Beth had always found his orderliness comforting, a solid foundation upon which their life together had been built. Thomas was the practical one, the planner, while she had been more spontaneous, more emotional. They had balanced each other that way. Nothing seemed to require the mysterious key. Beth closed the last drawer, puzzled. She stood and surveyed the room again, trying to think like Thomas. If he had hidden something, where would it be? His nature was so transparent, so straightforward, or at least that was what she had always believed. The Thomas she had known wouldn't have had secrets that required hidden keys and clandestine compartments. As Beth straightened up, her gaze fell on Thomas's bookshelf. Unlike the desk, the books showed the more personal side of her husband. First editions of Dickens that he collected, historical biographies of Churchill and other British statesmen, and the leather-bound complete works of Shakespeare that Beth had given him on their 10th anniversary. In the early years of their marriage, they had often read to each other in the evenings, a practice that had gradually faded as careers advanced and children arrived. She moved toward the shelf, drawn to the Shakespeare volume. Thomas had always quoted Sonnet 116 to her, "Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds." He had recited it at their wedding, his voice steady, but his hands trembling as he held hers. He had whispered it in her ear on their 30th anniversary, during the surprise party she had organized at their favorite restaurant. Even during his illness, when the pain had been at its worst, he had sometimes murmured fragments of it during moments of clarity. With a pang, Beth realized they had not read poetry together in years. When had that tradition faded? She couldn't pinpoint the moment when their evenings had transformed from shared readings to parallel silences. He with his newspaper, she with her needlepoint. Was it when the children were teenagers, demanding more of their attention? Was it when Thomas had received his first major promotion, bringing increased responsibilities and longer hours? Or had it simply eroded gradually, like a shoreline giving way to the constant pressure of the tides? As Beth's hand reached for the Shakespeare volume, her academic training made her pause. The book didn't look quite right on the shelf. It sat slightly forward of the others, and the leather seemed less worn than she would have expected for a book they had owned for over 2 decades. With a librarian's precision, she pulled the volume from the shelf, noticing immediately that it felt unusually heavy. Opening it, she gasped. The middle had been hollowed out, creating a secret compartment. Inside lay an envelope, yellowed with age, sealed with wax, and addressed in Thomas's unmistakable handwriting, "For my beloved Beth, to be opened only after I am gone." Her heart hammered against her ribs. Thomas had always been straightforward, almost predictable. Secret messages hidden in books belonged to spy novels, not to their conventional life in Cornwall. Yet here was evidence that her husband of 3 decades had deliberately concealed something from her. The thought was so discordant with her understanding of Thomas that for a moment, she wondered if she had somehow entered the wrong house, was examining the possessions of a stranger who merely resembled her late husband. The envelope was substantial, clearly containing more than just a single sheet of paper. The wax seal was dark red, almost burgundy, impressed with Thomas's signet ring, the family crest he had inherited from his grandfather and wore on his little finger every day of their marriage. Whatever this was, he had taken pains to ensure it remained private until after his death. The formality of it sent a chill down Beth's spine. This wasn't a hastily scribbled note. This was a deliberate message, prepared with care and hidden with intention. Her fingers hovered over the seal, then withdrew. Whatever was inside this envelope had the potential to change everything she thought she knew about Thomas. Did she really want that? Wasn't it better to preserve the memory of the man she had loved, the father of her children, the partner with whom she had built a life? What good could come from posthumous revelations? She carefully extracted the envelope and sank into Thomas's leather chair, the soft creaking of the well-worn hide sounding abnormally loud in the silence of the study. The chair still held the imprint of Thomas's form, molded over decades to accommodate his tall frame. Sitting in it felt both intimate and transgressive, like wearing his clothes or using his toothbrush. Yet something about this moment, this discovery, made it seem appropriate that she should occupy his space as she contemplated his secrets. The weight of grief pressed down on her anew. Discovering this hidden message was like losing Thomas all over again, or rather, discovering that the Thomas she had lost might not have been the man she thought she knew. The possibility opened a new dimension of grief, one she hadn't anticipated and wasn't sure she had the strength to navigate. She traced the edge of the envelope with her thumb, feeling the texture of the expensive paper Thomas had always preferred for important correspondence. The same paper on which he had written love notes during their courtship, on which he had drafted their wedding vows, on which he had penned letters of encouragement when she had doubted her abilities as a mother. Paper that had chronicled their life together in his distinctive handwriting, precise yet flowing, much like the man himself. The sudden feeling of being watched made Beth look up, half expecting to find Thomas standing in the doorway. Instead, her eyes fell on the portrait that hung on the wall opposite his desk, a family photograph taken on their 30th anniversary. Thomas stood behind Beth, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders, his silver hair contrasting with the dark suit he wore. Emma and James flanked them, both in their 20s then, both bearing the unmistakable Wilson features. Thomas's height, Beth's expressive eyes. They looked like the perfect family. Had they been? Beth's fingers trembled as she traced the outline of the envelope. Should she open it? Part of her wanted to preserve the unblemished memory of their marriage. What good could come from posthumous revelations? Thomas was gone. Any confessions or explanations could never be discussed, only endured. She thought of burning it, of maintaining the narrative of their marriage exactly as she had always understood it, a successful, if conventional partnership between two people who had loved each other steadily, if not always, passionately. But another part of her, the historian, the truth seeker, knew she could never destroy this message without reading it. Whatever Thomas had felt important enough to conceal, significant enough to preserve for her after his death, deserved to be known. 3 decades of marriage had earned her the right to his truths, however uncomfortable they might be. Still, she hesitated. Once read, the contents of this envelope could never be unread. Whatever revelations it contained would become part of their story, altering her memories, changing her understanding of their shared life. Was she strong enough to bear that? Still raw with grief? Still waking each morning with the momentary, devastating surprise of his absence? Beth set the envelope on the desk, the wax seal glinting in the afternoon light, and rose from Thomas's chair. She needed time, space, perspective before making this decision. The envelope had waited for months, perhaps years. It could wait a little longer. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across the study. Beth placed the envelope on the desk, unopened, and went to prepare herself a cup of tea. Some decisions required fortification. In the kitchen, Beth moved through the familiar ritual of tea making, finding momentary comfort in the routine. She filled the copper kettle, a wedding gift that had somehow survived 34 years of daily use, and placed it on the aga that dominated the kitchen. The solid warmth of the cooker had always been the heart of their home, providing not just meals, but the steady heat that permeated the house during Cornwall's damp winters. Thomas had initially balked at the expense of maintaining the vintage appliance, but Beth had insisted, and eventually he had come to appreciate its reliability, its solidity. "Like you," he had told her once, wrapping his arms around her waist as she cooked Sunday dinner. "Steady, dependable, the foundation of our home." As the kettle began to whistle, Beth opened the cabinet where they kept their teacups. Bone china with a delicate floral pattern, another wedding gift, reserved for daily use rather than special occasions, because Beth had always believed in enjoying beautiful things rather than preserving them. She selected Thomas's favorite cup, the one with the small chip on the handle from when James had knocked it over during a particularly rambunctious phase of his childhood. Thomas had never wanted to replace it, insisting that the imperfection gave it character. She prepared the tea as Thomas had preferred it, Earl Grey, brewed exactly 3.5 minutes with a splash of milk and half a teaspoon of sugar. Beth herself preferred Darjeeling without milk, but today she needed the comfort of Thomas's ritual, the illusion of preparing tea for two as she had for so many years. The tea brewed, Beth carried the cup back to the study, half expecting to find Thomas there, reading glasses perched on the end of his nose as he reviewed financial reports. The empty chair sent a fresh pang through her heart. How many more such moments would she endure? How long before the constant expectation of his presence faded? Before she stopped setting two places at dinner or reaching for his hand in the night? As she waited for the tea to steep, her mind wandered back to Thomas's final months. The cancer had been merciless and swift. From diagnosis to death, barely 6 months had passed. Not enough time to truly process what was happening, only enough to react to each new crisis. The doctors had discovered the pancreatic tumor during a routine checkup, already advanced, already spreading to his liver. "I'm sorry, Mr. Wilson," the consultant had said, his face grave above his starched white coat. "With this type of cancer, at this stage, we're talking about months, not years." Thomas had received the news with the same steady calm with which he had weathered financial crises and family emergencies throughout their marriage. "Well," he had said, reaching for Beth's hand as they sat in the consultant's office, "we'd better make the most of whatever time we have, hadn't we?" He had faced his illness with the same quiet dignity with which he had lived his life. No rage against the dying of the light for Thomas Wilson. Instead, a methodical preparation, a setting of his affairs in order. He had updated his will, organized his financial documents, even planned his own funeral, selecting readings, hymns, the oak casket with brass handles. "No sense leaving you to deal with all this when I'm gone," he had told Beth one evening, looking up from his careful notes. "One last act of love, my dear." Even as the pain medications increased and lucidity decreased, he had maintained his reserve. There had been no deathbed confessions, no emotional outpourings of regret or love. His last coherent words to her had been practical. "The will is with Simmons. The insurance policies are in the bottom right drawer of the desk. Don't let James handle the investments. He's too impulsive." Nothing about secret letters hidden in books. Had there been signs she had missed? Hints of whatever the letter contained? Beth searched her memory for anomalies, for unexplained absences or inconsistencies in Thomas's behavior over the years. His frequent business trips to London, had they been exactly what he claimed? The late nights at the office, had he truly been working? The separate bank account he had maintained for investment purposes, had it served some other function? No, she decided, after careful consideration. Thomas had been precisely who he appeared to be, a dedicated banker, a loving if somewhat reserved father, a husband who had remained steadfast through the ups and downs of a long marriage. Whatever the letter contained, she could not imagine it revealing a completely different man from the one she had known for 34 years. Beth returned to the study with her tea, her resolve strengthened. Whatever Thomas had felt the need to conceal during his life, but reveal after his death, deserved to be known. She had been his wife, his partner, the mother of his children. She had earned the right to his truths, however uncomfortable they might be. She settled back into Thomas's chair, the familiar scent of leather and his cologne enveloping her. The envelope sat on the desk where she had left it, innocuous, yet somehow threatening in its potential to disrupt the narrative of her marriage. With a deep breath, she lifted it, turning it over in her hands one last time before sliding her thumb beneath the wax seal. The seal broke with a satisfying crack, releasing a faint scent of the sandalwood ink Thomas had always preferred. Inside was a folded letter written on Thomas's personal stationery, the heavy cream paper embossed with his initials that he used only for important correspondence. Beth unfolded it with care, smoothing the creases with trembling fingers. The letter was dated just 2 months before his diagnosis. "My dearest Beth," it began in Thomas's precise handwriting, the slight backward slant that had always distinguished his penmanship as uniquely his. The familiar salutation, the same one he had used in birthday cards, anniversary notes, and the occasional letter left propped against her teacup when business took him away from home, gave no hint of the revelations to come. Beth took a fortifying sip of tea and continued reading. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and I can only hope you will find it in your heart to forgive what I am about to confess. Our life together has been filled with love and joy, but it has also been built upon a foundation of deception that has burdened my conscience for longer than I care to admit. 25 years ago, during a business trip to London, I met a woman named Catherine Blackwood. What began as a chance encounter evolved into something I never intended but could not bring myself to end. Over the years, Catherine became not just my lover, but a parallel life, one completely separate from our existence in Cornwall. I maintained a flat in London, ostensibly for business purposes, where Catherine and I built our own version of domesticity during my frequent work trips. The depth of my betrayal extends beyond mere infidelity, Beth. Catherine and I have a daughter, Rebecca, who is now 23 years old. The money that I claimed was being invested for our retirement has partially been used to support them and to pay for Rebecca's education. The account statements you will find in the hidden compartment of my desk, unlocked by the key I've left for you to find, will reveal the extent of these financial arrangements. I have lived 2 lives, loved 2 women, and been father to children who do not know of each other's existence. The weight of this duplicity has been my private cross to bear, and I have no right to seek absolution. However, I could not leave this world without giving you the truth you deserve, however painful. Catherine and Rebecca know about you, though I've kept the families separate to spare everyone unnecessary pain. They reside in the village of St. Albans at 47 Elm Street. What you do with this information is entirely your choice. You may wish to know them, or you may prefer to leave that chapter of my life and yours undisturbed. I cannot adequately express my remorse for the betrayal that has defined our marriage. Know that my love for you was never a lie, even if our life together was built on one. You deserved far better than the husband I proved to be. Forever yours in this life and whatever may follow, Thomas. The signature was unmistakably his, the elaborate T with its distinctive flourish, the way the S curved at the end of his name. Beth had seen it countless times on checks, on their children's permission slips, on anniversary cards. There was no possibility of forgery, no chance that this was some cruel joke perpetrated by an enemy. This was Thomas's confession, written in his own hand, preserved deliberately for her to find after his death. Beth read the letter once, twice, 3 times, each reading more painful than the last. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes and spilled onto the paper, causing the ink to run in places. Her hands shook violently, and the letter fell to the desk, the heavy cream paper seeming to glow accusingly in the fading afternoon light. 25 years, more than 2 decades of lies. A daughter she had never known existed, a woman who had shared her husband's love, his time, his resources, the very things Beth had believed were exclusively hers by right of marriage. Beth's mind reeled, unable to process the magnitude of Thomas's deception. Catherine Blackwood. The name echoed in Beth's mind, taking on substance and form. Who was she? Younger than Beth, certainly. Thomas would have been 39 25 years ago, at the height of his physical attractiveness, his career ascending. Beth imagined a sophisticated London woman, someone elegant and worldly, perhaps in the financial sector as well. Someone who understood Thomas's work in a way Beth, with her historian's perspective, never had. And Rebecca, a daughter, 23 years old. Born the same year, Thomas had received his first major promotion, the year they had moved from their modest semi-detached in Bristol to the Victorian house in Cornwall that had been beyond their means at the time. Thomas had insisted they could afford it. "The bank is taking care of me," he had said, squeezing her hand as they signed the mortgage documents. "We'll be comfortable, I promise." Had that been the beginning of the financial deception? Had their comfortable lifestyle, not extravagant but certainly secure, been partially funded by money that should have gone to investments, to their retirement? The implications were staggering. Not just emotional betrayal, but practical consequences that could affect Beth's future, her security, her ability to maintain the home they had shared. Their entire marriage, the life she had believed in so completely, suddenly seemed like an elaborate performance. How many business trips had actually been visits to his other family? How many late nights at the office had been spent in another woman's arms? The foundations of Beth's reality cracked and shifted beneath her. She thought of the sacrifices she had made for Thomas's career, for their family. Her own ambitions as a historian had been set aside so she could create the stable home that supported his rise through the banking world. The doctorate she had never completed. The book on Tudor women she had outlined so carefully but never written. The visiting lecturer position at Exeter University she had declined when Emma was small, knowing that the demanding schedule would have placed too much strain on their family life. She had believed they were partners in building a life together. Now she realized she had been living in the shadows, competing with a ghost she never knew existed, losing a competition she hadn't even known she was participating in. The academic career she had sacrificed, had it been necessary? Or had Thomas encouraged her to set aside her ambitions to make his double life easier to manage? The thought was acid in her throat. Rage surged through her body, not the cold, distant anger she had occasionally felt during their marriage over forgotten anniversaries or missed school performances, but a primal fury that made her want to scream, to break things, to tear down the perfect study that now seemed like a monument to Thomas's lies. She wanted to sweep the precisely arranged pens from his desk, to pull the carefully organized books from their shelves, to shatter the family photographs that now seemed like elaborate props in a theatrical production. Instead, she sat motionless, the grief counselor's words echoing in her mind. Anger is just pain's bodyguard. Beyond the rage lay a deeper, more devastating emotion: humiliation. How many people had known? Had his colleagues smirked behind her back at bank functions? Had there been whispers when she entered rooms? Had she been the object of pity all these years? Poor Beth Wilson, so devoted to her husband, so oblivious to his betrayal. The brass key still sat in her cardigan pocket, a tangible reminder of Thomas's deception. Its weight seemed to have increased, dragging at the wool like a physical manifestation of the truth's burden. With shaking hands, Beth retrieved it and turned back to the antique desk. She examined it more carefully now, running her fingers along the ornate woodwork, searching for anything unusual. The desk had been in Thomas's family for generations, a George III mahogany pedestal desk that his father had kept in his study and his grandfather before him. Thomas had always been inordinately proud of it, refusing Beth's occasional suggestions to replace it with something more modern, more practical. "It's a piece of history," he had insisted. "It's seen 3 generations of Wilson men through their careers. Someday, it will be James's." Now Beth wondered if its antique design, with its multiple drawers and panels, had been part of its appeal, the perfect repository for secrets, with hiding places built by craftsmen who understood the value of privacy in an era before digital passwords and encrypted files. Her fingers traced the intricate carvings along the side panels, feeling for inconsistencies, for hidden catches or compartments. On the right side, partly concealed by decorative carving, she found a keyhole that had previously escaped her notice. It was small, almost invisible unless one was specifically looking for it. The brass key fit perfectly. With a soft click, a hidden panel in the desk's side swung open, revealing a small compartment. Inside lay a stack of bank statements, a small photo album, and another sealed envelope. The sight of these carefully preserved documents, this physical evidence of Thomas's double life, made Beth's head swim. Part of her wanted to slam the panel shut, to relock it and pretend she had never found the key, never read the letter. But the historian in her, the part that had always valued truth above comfort, reached for the contents. Beth reached for the bank statements first. They were organized chronologically, bound with a black ribbon in the same meticulous manner Thomas had employed for all his financial records. The oldest dated back 25 years, to the very beginning of his relationship with Catherine. Beth untied the ribbon with trembling fingers and began to review the documents. They documented 25 years of systematic financial deception, regular transfers to an account in Catherine Blackwood's name, payments for a London flat in Kensington, university fees for Rebecca, all meticulously recorded in Thomas's precise bookkeeping style, as if the betrayal was just another business transaction to be documented. Each statement, each transfer, represented a conscious choice Thomas had made to divert funds from their shared future to support his secret family. Beth did a quick mental calculation. The amounts were substantial, not enough to bankrupt them, but certainly enough to impact their lifestyle, their retirement plans. No wonder Thomas had been so insistent that they downsize after his retirement, selling the London pied-à-terre they had maintained for years. "We don't need the extra expense," he had argued. "Cornwall is home now." Had the real reason been that he could no longer justify maintaining 3 properties on his pension? The photo album was worse. Bound in soft leather, it contained snapshots of a life Beth had never known existed. Thomas, with a slim, elegant woman with auburn hair. Beth studied Catherine's face, searching for clues. She was attractive in an understated way, her style classic rather than fashionable, her smile reserved. There was an intelligence in her eyes that Beth recognized, the same quality that had attracted her to Thomas all those years ago. Other photos showed Thomas holding a baby, his face transformed with a tenderness Beth had seen only when he had held Emma and James as infants. Thomas at what appeared to be Rebecca's graduation, his face beaming with paternal pride. The same expression he had worn at Emma's and James's graduations. The same smile, the same proud stance, duplicated across two separate lives. One photograph in particular caught Beth's eye. Thomas and Catherine standing before what appeared to be the London flat, arms around each other, both slightly older than in the earlier photos. What struck Beth was not just their obvious intimacy, but the setting. It appeared to be taken during Christmas, judging by the wreath on the door behind them. Beth checked the date on the back, December 18th, 7 years ago. That had been the Christmas Thomas had missed their family celebration, called away on urgent bank business following the financial crisis. He had apologized profusely, sent extravagant gifts, promised to make it up to them, and all the while, he had been celebrating with his other family. The second envelope contained legal documents, a deed to the London flat, now transferred to Catherine's name, and a revised will that Beth had never seen, providing for Rebecca while carefully concealing her existence from Beth and her children. Thomas had thought of everything, maintaining his double life even beyond the grave. The precision of it, the calculation, chilled Beth to the bone. This hadn't been a moment of weakness or a brief affair. This had been a deliberate, sustained deception, carried out over more than 2 decades. There was something else in the envelope. A small, velvet box. Beth opened it with a sense of dread. Inside lay a pearl pendant on a delicate gold chain. She recognized it immediately. It was identical to the one Thomas had given her on their 25th anniversary. "Pearls for 25 years," he had said, fastening it around her neck. "Traditional, elegant, and timeless. Just like you, my love." Had he given Catherine the same gift, with the same words? The thought was almost more painful than the financial deception. The money was quantifiable, concrete, but the duplication of intimacy, of those small personal moments Beth had treasured as uniquely theirs, that was a different kind of betrayal altogether. Beth closed the velvet box with a snap and returned it to the envelope. She couldn't bear to look at it anymore, this tangible evidence of Thomas's emotional duplicity. She carefully replaced all the items in the hidden compartment, locked it, and pocketed the key. She would need to examine everything in detail later, when the initial shock had subsided, when she could approach the evidence with something resembling objectivity. Outside, darkness had fallen completely. Beth sat in Thomas's study, surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal, feeling as if she had aged decades in a single afternoon. The foundations of her identity, as Thomas's wife, as one half of a successful marriage, had been shattered. The narrative she had constructed about her life, about the choices she had made, about the partnership she had believed in, lay in ruins around her. Who was she now? The deceived wife? The fool? The unwitting accomplice to another woman's pain? Through the window she could see her reflection superimposed on the darkened garden. A pale oval of a face, the silver in her chestnut hair catching the light from the desk lamp. She barely recognized herself. Was this the same woman who had sat beside Thomas's hospital bed, holding his hand as he slipped away? The same woman who had stood with dignity at his funeral, accepting condolences from colleagues and friends who had possibly known all along about Catherine, about Rebecca? The clock in the hallway struck 7, the familiar Westminster chimes echoing through the empty house. Beth realized she had been sitting in the study for hours, lost in the ruined landscape of her marriage. She should eat something, should move, should do something other than sit in this room that now felt contaminated by deception. But the thought of performing normal activities, preparing a meal, watching television, getting ready for bed, seemed impossible. How did one continue with the mundane routines of life after discovering that its very foundations were built on sand? The sound of the front door opening startled her from her thoughts. "Mom?" Emma's voice called from the hallway. "Are you home? Your car's outside, but all the lights are off." Emma, her daughter, Thomas's daughter. The sound of her voice was both a lifeline and a complication. Beth hastily gathered the evidence of Thomas's other life and returned it to the secret compartment, leaving only the letter on the desk. She couldn't hide this from her children, but she needed time to process it herself before sharing such devastating news. How did one tell grown children that their father had led a double life? That somewhere in England, they had a half-sister they had never met? "In the study, darling," she called back, her voice surprisingly steady despite the emotional earthquake that had just leveled her world. She quickly wiped her eyes, knowing they would be red-rimmed from crying, but unable to do anything about it now. Emma appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting from concern to relief. At 32, she was the image of Beth at the same age, the same chestnut hair, the same analytical gaze that missed nothing. She had inherited Beth's academic leanings as well, securing a position as an art historian at the Victoria and Albert Museum after completing her doctorate at Cambridge. Beth had always been proud of her daughter's accomplishments, especially knowing that Emma had fulfilled the academic potential Beth herself had set aside. Now she wondered if Thomas had encouraged Emma's career as some form of atonement, a way of vicariously supporting the path Beth had abandoned. "Sitting in the dark, Mum? That's not like you," Emma said, moving into the room and switching on a lamp on one of the side tables. The sudden illumination made Beth blink, feeling exposed, vulnerable. "Sitting in the dark, Mum? That's not like you." "Just lost in thought," Beth replied, attempting to smile, though it felt like her face might crack with the effort. "What brings you by?" Emma unwound a colorful scarf from around her neck, a gift from Thomas on her last birthday, Beth recalled with a pang, and draped it over the back of a chair. "James called. He said you were finally sorting through Dad's things today. I thought you might need some moral support." Her gaze swept the room, taking in the emptied wardrobe visible through the open door, the boxes stacked in the hallway. "Looks like you've made progress." "Yes, I've been at it most of the day." Beth's voice sounded distant to her own ears, as if she were speaking from the bottom of a well. Emma's perceptive eyes narrowed slightly, sensing something amiss. Her gaze fell on the letter on the desk, then rose to meet her mother's gaze. The intuitive connection between them had always been strong, stronger than the one Beth had shared with Thomas, she realized now. Emma could read her mother's emotional state with uncanny accuracy. "What's that?" she asked, gesturing to the letter with a slight frown. Beth considered lying, deflecting, protecting her daughter from the truth, as Thomas had protected them all these years. But she was tired of deception, even by omission. And Emma was an adult, with a right to know the truth about her father, however painful that truth might be. "Your father left me a letter," she said, her voice barely audible even in the quiet room. "It seems he had secrets." Emma moved further into the room, her expression guarded. "What kind of secrets?" "The kind that change everything." Beth gestured to the chair opposite the desk. "Sit down, Emma. There's something you need to know about your father." Emma hesitated, then moved to the chair and perched on its edge, her body tense as if preparing for physical impact. Beth recognized the defensive posture. It was the same one Emma had adopted as a teenager when called to the study to explain a poor grade or a missed curfew. The memory sent a fresh wave of pain through Beth's chest. How many family rituals, how many shared experiences would now be tainted by the knowledge of Thomas's betrayal? "Dad was always so straightforward," Emma said, her voice small. "What could he possibly have kept from us?" Beth looked into her daughter's trusting eyes and felt a surge of protective instinct. Perhaps Thomas had been right to keep his family separate. Perhaps some truths were too destructive to share. But the decision had been taken out of her hands the moment Thomas sealed that letter. "Your father," Beth began, struggling to keep her voice steady, "had another family." The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. Emma's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to a dawning horror that mirrored Beth's own reaction. "No," Emma whispered. "That's not possible. Dad wouldn't." "For 25 years, Beth continued, passing the letter to her daughter. "A woman named Catherine, a daughter named Rebecca." Emma's hands shook as she took the letter, her eyes scanning the page with increasing distress. "This can't be real," she said, looking up at her mother with tears in her eyes. "Dad loved us. He loved you." "Yes," Beth said softly. "I believe he did, but he loved them too." Emma read the letter again, her academic mind, so like Beth's, trying to make sense of the incomprehensible. "Does James know?" Beth shook her head. "You're the first person I've told. I only discovered it myself an hour ago." "Oh, Mom." Emma rose from her chair and moved around the desk, wrapping her arms around her mother's shoulders. "I'm so sorry." Beth leaned into her daughter's embrace, allowing herself to be comforted. "I don't know who I am anymore, Emma. Everything I believed about my life, about your father, about our marriage, it feels like a lie." "Not everything," Emma said fiercely. "He was still Dad. He still loved us. This doesn't erase 34 years of marriage or the family we built, but it did change everything," Beth thought but didn't say. Every memory was now tainted, every anniversary, every family holiday. Had Thomas been thinking of his other family during their celebrations? Had he been comparing the two women in his life, the two sets of children? "What will you do?" Emma asked, returning to her seat but keeping hold of her mother's hand across the desk. Beth had been asking herself the same question since reading the letter. What did one do with such a revelation? Ignore it and try to preserve what was left of her memories? Or confront it head on? "I need to know," Beth said finally. "I need to see her, them. Otherwise, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering, imagining, torturing myself with questions." "I'll go with you," Emma offered immediately. Beth squeezed her daughter's hand gratefully, but shook her head. "This is something I need to do alone. But first, we need to tell James." James took the news harder than Emma. At 28, he had idolized his father in a way his more pragmatic sister never had. The revelation of Thomas's double life felt like a personal betrayal, an attack on his own identity. "So my whole life is a joke?" he demanded, pacing Beth's living room 2 days later. "Everything Dad taught me about integrity and responsibility, it was all bullshit?" "James," Emma cautioned, glancing at their mother. "No, he's right to be angry," Beth said. "We all are." "I don't understand how you can be so calm about this," James continued, running a hand through his dark hair, Thomas's hair. "He cheated on you for 25 years. He had another child. He spent your money on them." "Our money," Beth corrected gently. "And being angry won't change what happened. I need answers more than I need rage right now." "So you're really going to meet this woman?" James looked incredulous. "The mistress?" Beth winced at the word, though it was technically accurate. "Catherine," she said, giving the woman a name, making her real. "And possibly Rebecca. I need to understand what happened. I need to see the life your father led when he wasn't with us." "I think it's crazy," James declared. "What good can come from it? It's just going to cause more pain." "Perhaps," Beth acknowledged. "But I've spent 34 years in the dark. I'm tired of not knowing." The discussion continued late into the evening, emotions running high as the three of them tried to process the seismic shift in their family narrative. By the time her children left, Emma with a tight hug and a whispered, "Call me anytime," James with a stiff nod and unresolved anger, Beth felt emotionally drained, but more certain of her decision. The next morning, she contacted Thomas's solicitor, a dry little man named Simmons who had handled the family's legal affairs for decades. His carefully neutral expression told Beth immediately that he had known about Thomas's double life. "How long have you known?" she asked directly once they were seated in his wood-paneled office. Simmons adjusted his glasses uncomfortably. "Mrs. Wilson, I am bound by client confidentiality." "Thomas is dead," Beth interrupted. "And I've found the letter, the documents, everything. I don't need your confirmation, Mr. Simmons. I need information." The solicitor seemed to deflate slightly. 20 years, he admitted finally. "I helped Mr. Wilson set up the trust for Rebecca's education." Another betrayal, though a professional rather than a personal one. Beth felt oddly detached, as if she were discussing someone else's life. "I want to know everything," she said. "Every legal arrangement, every financial transaction. I want complete transparency about my husband's other life." By the time Beth left Simmons' office 2 hours later, she had a comprehensive understanding of the legal and financial aspects of Thomas's deception. The flat in London, the regular allowance for Catherine, the educational trust for Rebecca, all meticulously arranged to remain hidden from Beth, while ensuring Catherine and Rebecca would be provided for even after Thomas's death. The pragmatic details helped Beth focus, gave her something concrete to grasp amid the emotional chaos. Thomas had been a banker to his core. Even his betrayal had been organized with spreadsheets and trust funds. 1 week later, Beth found herself driving toward St. Albans, the address from Thomas's letter programmed into her GPS. She had informed neither Emma nor James of her exact plans, not wanting them to try to dissuade her again. Margaret, her oldest friend, was the only one who knew where she was going. "Are you sure about this, Beth?" Margaret had asked over tea the day before. "Some stones are better left unturned. I've spent my entire adult life with a man who kept half of himself hidden from me," Beth had replied. "I won't spend whatever years I have left wondering and imagining. I need to see her face to face." The drive gave Beth too much time to think, to second guess, to rehearse and discard potential opening lines. What did one say to the woman who had shared one's husband for a quarter century? "Hello, I'm Thomas's wife," seemed simultaneously redundant and inadequate. St. Albans was a picturesque cathedral city, its medieval architecture and narrow streets evoking a sense of history that would have appealed to Thomas. Beth drove slowly through the town center, her anxiety mounting as she approached Elm Street. Number 47 was a modest Victorian terraced house with a small front garden bright with autumn flowers. It was well maintained but not ostentatious, similar in many ways to Beth's own home in Cornwall, though on a smaller scale. Beth parked across the street and sat motionless, her hands gripping the steering wheel. What was she doing here? What did she hope to achieve? Would confronting Catherine heal anything, or would it just create new wounds? Beth had no answers, only questions that had haunted her since discovering Thomas's letter. After 20 minutes of internal debate, Beth finally gathered the courage to exit her car. She crossed the street slowly, each step requiring conscious effort. At the small iron gate, she paused again, fighting the urge to flee back to the safety of her car, back to Cornwall, back to the life she had known before Thomas's posthumous confession. "Can I help you?" The voice startled Beth from her thoughts. A young woman stood in the doorway of number 47, tall and slender, with Thomas's jawline and eyes. Rebecca. There was no mistaking the resemblance. It was like looking at James in feminine form. Beth's carefully rehearsed words evaporated. She stood frozen, staring at the living evidence of Thomas's betrayal. "Are you all right?" Rebecca asked, taking a step forward, concern evident in her expression, Thomas's expression when he was worried. Beth began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. "Is Catherine at home?" Rebecca's posture changed subtly, becoming more guarded. "May I ask who's calling?" The moment of truth had arrived more abruptly than Beth had anticipated. "My name is Elizabeth Wilson," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I was Thomas Wilson's wife." Rebecca's face drained of color. For a moment, Beth thought the young woman might faint. Then Rebecca stepped back and called into the house, her voice shaking. "Mom, you need to come here." Moments later, another figure appeared in the doorway, a woman approximately Beth's age, with auburn hair now streaked with gray, wearing a simple blue dress that complemented her tall, willowy frame. Her eyes widened in shock as she took in Beth standing at her gate. "Mrs. Wilson," Catherine said softly. "Mrs. Blackwood," Beth replied, the formality giving her something to cling to in the surreal moment. A heavy silence fell between them, thick with 25 years of unspoken history. Rebecca looked from one woman to the other, clearly uncertain what to do. Finally, Catherine seemed to collect herself. "Would you like to come in?" she asked, stepping aside to make room in the doorway. It was the last thing Beth had expected, an invitation rather than a confrontation. She had prepared for denial, for anger, for doors slammed in her face. The quiet dignity of Catherine's response momentarily unbalanced her. "Yes," Beth heard herself say. "I think I would." The interior of Catherine's home was tasteful, but modest. Comfortable furnishings, walls lined with bookshelves, family photographs on every surface. It was a home filled with life and memories, just as Beth's was. The normality of it was jarring. Rebecca excused herself almost immediately, murmuring something about an appointment, but Beth suspected the young woman simply couldn't bear the tension. Catherine led Beth to a small sitting room at the rear of the house, overlooking a garden where late roses still bloomed against a stone wall. "Tea?" Catherine offered, her hands clasped tightly together, the only visible sign of her distress. Beth nodded, grateful for the familiar ritual. She sat stiffly on the edge of an armchair while Catherine busied herself with the tea things. Neither woman spoke until Catherine had poured 2 cups and seated herself opposite Beth. "Thomas left me a letter," Beth said finally, breaking the silence. "After he died," Catherine nodded. "He told me he planned to. I didn't think... That is, I never expected you would come here." "Neither did I," Beth admitted. "But I needed to see..." She gestured vaguely around the room, at the life Thomas had built parallel to their own. "To see if it was real," Catherine finished for her, understanding in her eyes. "It is, though not in the way you might think." Beth took a sip of tea to steady herself. 25 years, she said, not bothering to keep the pain from her voice. "Half of my married life." Catherine flinched, but didn't look away. "Yes." "Did you know?" Beth asked the question that had tormented her most. "When it began, did you know he was married?" "Not at first," Catherine replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "We met at a gallery opening. He said he was in London on business. It was 3 months before I discovered the truth. And yet you continued." Beth couldn't keep the accusation from her tone. "I did," Catherine acknowledged. "I won't insult you with excuses or justifications, Mrs. Wilson. By the time I learned Thomas was married, I was already in love with him. And then later, there was Rebecca." She paused, visibly struggling with her words. "I'm not proud of the choices I made. Did you ask him to leave me?" Beth needed to know how close she had come to losing everything without ever knowing it was at risk. Catherine shook her head. "Once, early on, he said he wouldn't abandon his family. After that, we never discussed it again. We established boundaries." Boundaries. Such a clinical term for the compartmentalization of a life, for the careful separation of wife from mistress, of one family from another. "What was he like with you?" Beth asked, the question escaping before she could reconsider. "Was he the same man I knew?" Catherine considered this, her gaze drifting to a photograph on a side table. Thomas and Rebecca at what appeared to be her university graduation. "I don't know what he was like with you," she said finally. "With us, he was present when he was here, fully engaged with Rebecca's life, with our home, but always aware of the time, always with one foot out the door." It was the opposite of what Beth had known. A Thomas distracted by work, often mentally absent even when physically present. 2 incomplete men, making one whole life. "Did you hate me?" Beth asked, surprising herself with the directness of the question. "No," Catherine answered, meeting Beth's gaze steadily. "I envied you. You had the life I could never have, the legitimate marriage, the public acknowledgement, the family holidays and social events. You had Thomas Wilson, respected banker and family man. I had Thomas who visited when he could, who existed in the shadows." The bitterness in Catherine's voice was unmistakable, though carefully controlled. Beth realized with a jolt that Catherine had suffered her own version of betrayal, loving a man who could never fully belong to her, raising a child who could never publicly claim her father's name. "And Rebecca?" Beth asked, glancing toward the hallway where the young woman had disappeared. "She knew from an early age that her father had another family," Catherine said. "Thomas insisted on honesty with her, if not with..." She trailed off, not needing to finish the sentence. "If not with you," Beth mentally completed. "If not with Emma and James." The weight of all the lies pressed down on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. "Why did you come, Mrs. Wilson?" Catherine asked gently. "What were you hoping to find here?" Beth had been asking herself the same question during the entire drive to St. Albans. "Understanding, perhaps," she said slowly. "Or closure. I don't know if either is possible." "Probably not," Catherine acknowledged. "Some wounds never fully heal. They just become part of who we are." They sat in silence for several minutes, 2 women connected by love for the same man, by pain inflicted by the same hand. Beth studied Catherine more carefully, the intelligence in her eyes, the quiet dignity in her posture. She could see what might have attracted Thomas, and the realization brought an unexpected pang of empathy rather than jealousy. "He loved you both," Catherine said suddenly. "I know that doesn't help, but it's true. Thomas wasn't capable of choosing between his two lives, his two families. In the end, he couldn't bear to lose either. So he kept us both in the dark instead, Beth said, the anger rising again. He took away our choice. Yes, Catherine agreed. That was his greatest selfishness. A knock at the front door interrupted their conversation. Moments later, Rebecca reappeared in the sitting room doorway, her expression cautious. "I forgot my keys," she explained, her eyes darting between the two women. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "It's all right," Catherine said. "Mrs. Wilson was just leaving." Beth realized it was true. She had learned all she could from this meeting. There were no villains here, only victims of Thomas's inability to choose, to commit fully to one life over another. As Beth rose to leave, Rebecca spoke again, her voice tentative. "I have a brother and sister, don't I?" Beth looked at Thomas's daughter, a young woman who had grown up without siblings, without extended family, without the ability to openly claim her father. "Yes," she said gently. "Emma is 32. James is 28. Rebecca nodded, absorbing this information. "Do they know about me?" "They do now," Beth replied. "They're still processing, as am I." "Would they?" Rebecca stopped, then gathered her courage. "Would they ever want to meet me, do you think?" The question caught Beth off guard. In all her imaginings of this confrontation, she had never considered the possibility of blending these separate lives, of acknowledging connections between the two families Thomas had kept apart. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Emma might be open to it eventually. James is still very angry." Rebecca nodded again, disappointment evident in her expression. "I understand. It was just a thought." As Beth gathered her handbag and prepared to leave, Catherine walked her to the door. At the threshold, the two women faced each other one last time, their shared history hanging between them. "I am sorry," Catherine said quietly. "Not for loving Thomas, but for the pain it caused you." Beth studied the other woman's face, searching for insincerity but finding none. "Thank you," she said finally, "for seeing me, for answering my questions." "What will you do now?" Catherine asked. Beth hadn't thought beyond this meeting, beyond confronting the woman who had shared her husband's life. "Live," she said simply. "Find out who I am without Thomas, without the marriage I thought I had." Catherine nodded in understanding. "Good luck, Mrs. Wilson." "Beth," she corrected automatically. "I think under the circumstances, we can dispense with formalities." A ghost of a smile touched Catherine's lips. "Beth," she acknowledged. "Good luck." The drive back to Cornwall gave Beth time to process the meeting, to begin integrating this new reality into her understanding of her life with Thomas. Catherine had not been what she expected, not a homewrecker or a vixen, but a woman who had made difficult choices and lived with their consequences. Rebecca was clearly Thomas's daughter, not just in appearance but in mannerisms, in the thoughtful way she had observed the interaction between the two women who had loved her father. Beth had gone seeking a villain and found only another victim. The true culprit, Thomas himself, was beyond reach, beyond accountability. She would never have the confrontation she truly needed, never hear his explanation or apology. The letter would have to suffice. When Beth arrived home late that evening, she found Emma waiting on her doorstep. "You went to see her, didn't you?" her daughter asked as Beth approached. "Yes," Beth admitted, unlocking the door and gesturing Emma inside. "How did you know?" "Because I know you," Emma replied, following her mother into the kitchen. "You've never been able to leave a question unanswered. It's why you would have made a brilliant historian if Dad hadn't—" She stopped abruptly, realizing the implications of what she'd been about to say. "If your father hadn't needed me to support his career instead," Beth finished for her, putting the kettle on for yet another cup of tea. "It's all right, Emma. We can acknowledge the truth now." They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where the family had gathered for countless meals over the decades. "What was she like?" Emma asked finally. Beth considered how to describe Catherine. "Dignified," she said after a moment. "Intelligent, not what I expected." "And the daughter? My half-sister?" The term clearly felt strange to Emma. "Rebecca," Beth supplied. "She looks like your father, like James, actually. She asked if you and James would ever want to meet her." Emma's eyebrows rose. "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that I didn't know, that you might be open to it eventually, that James is still too angry." Emma was quiet for a long moment, tracing patterns on the wooden tabletop with her fingertip. "I might," she said finally. "Not now, but someday. I'm curious about her." Beth nodded, understanding the feeling all too well. Curiosity had driven her to St. Albans, had pushed her to confront the reality of Thomas's other life, rather than letting it remain an abstract betrayal. "What about you, Mum?" Emma asked. "What happens now?" It was the same question Catherine had posed, the one Beth had been asking herself since discovering Thomas's letter. What did one do after learning that half of one's married life had been built on deception? "I'm going to sell the house," Beth said, the decision crystallizing as she spoke it aloud. "It's too large for just me, and there are too many memories here." "Where will you go?" Emma looked surprised but not opposed to the idea. "I'm not sure yet. Somewhere smaller, somewhere by the sea, perhaps." Beth had always loved the coast, had dreamed of living within sight of the waves before settling in their inland village to accommodate Thomas's commute. "And what will you do?" Emma pressed gently. Beth thought of the history books she had packed away decades ago, of the academic career she had abandoned to become Thomas's wife, of the intellectual passion she had channeled into raising children and maintaining a home. "I think," she said slowly, "I might go back to university, finish what I started all those years ago." Emma's face lit up with a genuine smile. The first Beth had seen since Thomas's letter had detonated their family narrative. "You'd be brilliant, Mum. It's not too late." Not too late. The words echoed in Beth's mind as she prepared for bed that night. At 56, she was a widow, but not the widow she had thought she was. Her marriage had been both more and less than she had believed. The foundation of her adult identity had been fractured, but not destroyed entirely. She still had her children, her legitimate children, she thought with a pang of guilt at the qualification. She had her mind, her health, her resources. And now she had something she hadn't possessed in 34 years. Complete freedom to define herself on her own terms, without reference to Thomas's needs or expectations. As Beth drifted towards sleep, she found herself thinking not of Thomas or Catherine or the decades of deception, but of the history department at the local university. Tomorrow, she decided, she would make inquiries about mature student applications. Tomorrow would be the first day of her new, self-determined life. The following year brought changes Beth could never have anticipated in the dark days after discovering Thomas's betrayal. True to her word, she sold the family home, using a portion of the proceeds to purchase a small cottage overlooking the sea in a village 20 miles from her former life. The remainder she invested for her future and divided into trusts for Emma and James. The cottage became her sanctuary, a place entirely her own, untainted by memories of Thomas. She filled it with books, with art she had always admired but Thomas had found too modern, with comfortable furniture arranged to take advantage of the spectacular coastal views. For the first time in her adult life, every decision about her living space reflected only her own preferences. Beth had also followed through on her plan to return to education, enrolling in a master's program in British history at the regional university. Being a student again at 57 had been terrifying at first, but Beth discovered that her life experience gave her perspectives her younger classmates lacked. Her professors valued her contributions, and she found herself thriving in the academic environment she had abandoned decades earlier. James had gradually moved beyond his initial anger, though he remained adamant about not meeting Rebecca. Emma, however, had cautiously established contact with her half-sister. Their relationship was still tentative, but developing. Beth neither encouraged nor discouraged this connection, recognizing that each of her children needed to process Thomas's betrayal in their own way. Beth's own relationship with Catherine remained complicated. They were not friends, could never be friends, but they had developed a wary respect for each other. Occasionally, they met for coffee when Beth visited the university library in St. Albans. These meetings were brief and somewhat awkward, but they served a purpose for both women, acknowledging the reality they shared rather than retreating into denial. On the anniversary of Thomas's death, Beth visited his grave for the first time since discovering his letter. She stood beside the granite headstone, the wind from the nearby sea rustling through the cemetery's trees, unsure what she felt. The acute pain of betrayal had dulled over the months, leaving in its place a complex mixture of grief, anger, and a strange sort of gratitude. "You were right about one thing," Beth said aloud to the silent stone. "I needed to know the truth, however painful. But you were wrong to think I couldn't have handled it while you were alive." There was, of course, no response, no explanation, no apology. Beth placed a single white rose on the grave, not out of enduring love, but as acknowledgement of the complicated history they shared. "Goodbye, Thomas," she said quietly. "I'm letting you go now." As Beth walked away from the cemetery, her phone chimed with a text from her academic advisor, confirming their meeting to discuss her dissertation proposal. Beth smiled at the screen. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth. Her life was her own now, no longer defined by Thomas's deception or even by her reaction to it. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in decades, that uncertainty felt like possibility rather than threat. Beth had survived the unraveling of her marriage, the shattering of her self-image, the painful reconstruction of her past. Whatever challenges the future held, she would face them on her own terms, with her hard-won wisdom and newfound strength. The sea stretched before her as she drove along the coastal road toward home. Her home, created by her choices. The waves crashed against the cliffs, constant yet ever-changing, like the woman Beth was becoming in this unexpected chapter of her life.